Supervisor Hardinger, could you please mark present? And Ungerer, Supervisor Ungerer, please. Supervisor Ungerer, you're not marking present?
Okay, I'll mark you present. Okay, yep, I saw you.
Okay, you're marked in now. Thank you, everyone. And I'd like to welcome all of the visitors that we have here this evening, along with our viewing audience. And so we will move on to educational presentations. And we have several department heads that are going to provide information about their departments. However, item 7B, 7A, facilities and capital management will be scheduled for another day. They are not available. So we'll move on to item 7B, and that's employee resources. And we have the director from Employee Resources, Molly Adzik. Would you please, if you would?
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Molly Adzik. I'm the Director of Employee Resources. I'm responsible for overseeing the human resource and risk management functions for Marathon County. My department develops, administers, and enforces county personnel policies and is responsible for the performance management as well as employee training and development from both a growth and compliance standpoint for all Marathon County staff. Given the breadth of the responsibilities out of my department, I have a relatively lean staff with just 6 direct reports. We have 1 administrative coordinator primarily responsible for pre-employment screening, pre-employment physicals, psychologicals, employment verifications, and other duties as assigned. I have a risk manager that's responsible for all county liability and property insurance. We insure over $358 million of county-owned property. Our risk manager is also responsible for our employee wellness program, our superintendent safety committee, as well as compliance with the Wisconsin Department of Safety and Professional Services. We have a benefit analyst that's responsible for managing employee benefit programs, open and special enrollments, and health, dental, life insurance, deferred comp programs, other voluntary benefits, retirement questions, COBRA elections, etc. We have 1 individual that's primarily responsible for workers' comp and FMLA administration. We've got two workforce strategists, which are responsible primarily for the recruitment and retention of staff countywide from all of our departments. I call that the most important job because if we don't have staff to do the work, nothing gets done. Unfortunately, this has become an increasingly difficult task. As you can imagine, I'm sure we've seen workforce shortages throughout other industries. We have seen a 38% increase in our turnover. We saw that from 2020 to 2021. We're on track so far in 2022 to see an additional 56% increase in our turnover year over year. All the while, we've seen a 44% reduction in the average number of applicants per requisition. So recruitment and retention is a large issue. I'm sure you will all be hearing more from me on that topic as time goes on in the coming months. But we have some really exciting large-scale projects underway in my department right now, one of which being the implementation of an enterprise resource planning tool, which is going to allow for more efficiency in our workflows. It's going to allow for better reporting, better decision-making. It's going to the ease of the application process from an applicant standpoint. For our current employees, they're going to be able to have self-service within from an application cloud-based service. We're moving to Workday, if any of you are familiar with that. There's a lot of employers in Wisconsin and throughout the United States that use that. Additionally, we are in the middle of a classification and compensation study to make sure that we have the right compensation plan in place for our staff. We're also doing a comprehensive review of all of our employee benefits and considering potentially a self-funded program opposed to a fully insured plan for our health insurance. So a lot going on in the world of employee resources. Any questions?
So any questions for Molly? Thank you, Molly. And we also have, next with us, we have the Finance Director for Marathon County, and that Finance Director is Christy Palmer. Christy, if you would, please. Nope, but still not on.
There.
There you go.
I'm not in the IT department, as you can see. I deal with numbers, not on and off switches. So my name is Christy Palmer. You've seen me before, I believe, at some of the county board meetings. I am the finance director, and I have been with Marathon County since 2001. And I had previously worked here in the clerk of court's office some years prior to that, and had come back because Marathon County as an employer is a great place to work. So with that, we do finance. So we work with every single department in the county. And with that means we get to learn a lot about what everybody does. But what we do is we do a lot of we do the financial reporting and accounting. We deal with the treasurer's office. We work very closely with the treasurer's office they handle the cash management, but we work with the debt bond counsel, financial advisors, work with the treasurer's office in those regards. We work very closely with the county administration's office for the annual budget process. We do all of the payroll for the county. We do all the accounts payable. We work with the auditors to produce the financial records, and they do the audit of that. Internally, we work with Molly's office, Employee Resources, because they hire the people and we pay them, so we have a really great relationship, and you can't have one without the other, so that's one of the really nice things about having a pretty small group, but a pretty solid group of folks, because we work really well together. Work with the county clerk, working on meetings and agendas and getting her all the things she needs. Work with Corporation Counsel's office, because you always want to have good attorneys. I'm looking at Lance because he in a previous life was an attorney. And you also want to have good accountants, so we make sure that we have our audit people come in and get that done for us. Along with that, some of the things that we've done, things we do now is different than it was in the past. In 2021, all the departments worked on the routes to recovery. The reporting of that back to the state of Wisconsin Department of Administration came through us. We were able to obtain and roll out over $2.6 million in routes to recovery for Marathon County. And now we're working closely with the county administrator's office, the county treasurer's office, and all of the departments on ARPA. And that we just received our second tranche. County treasurer was able to verify that last Monday night. So we have a little over 26.3 million, or 10 times the amount of routes to recovery that will be coordinating the administrative duties and the financial reporting of that for the county. So lots of fun, and as Molly had said, we are migrating to a new ERP system called Workday. Our current system is about 28 years old, our current financial accounting system, so it has some limitations. I'll just leave it at that. But we are really super excited, and we want to start getting the other departments involved in that, so that's something that we're spending a lot of time on, and want to make sure that we not only build a great system, but also make sure people are encouraged to participate and empower employees to be able to use the employee self-service portal and use it effectively.
Okay, any questions for Christy?
All right, well, thank you, and I'm sure you'll see me again, particularly with budget time, because that's coming up. Summer is not only highway construction and summer, it's the start of the budget season, so you'll see me again, and since I like numbers, it's actually one of my favorite parts of the job. So.
And, the other thing that Christy has always made known to the HR Finance Committee, that she's really going to resent when we close out and stop using Kayenta and move to the new Workday. So, well, maybe not. Okay. Next, we have with us Corp Counsel, Michael Purner, as Corporation Counsel for Marathon County. So I'll leave it to Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think everyone has seen me around here a little bit, but just to reintroduce myself, I'm Mike Puner. I'm the Corporation Counsel. You've seen part of my job certainly as the parliamentarian for the county board and for county committees. I am also a department head, so I do have a department and a staff of attorneys working with me. In addition to providing legal advice to this board and to all of the county departments, my office provides legal advice to CCIT, North Central Healthcare, and the ADRC. We also are creatures of state statute. You might have heard that when we did county board orientation, that you are a creature of statute. A lot of what my office does is because state law requires the county to do certain things. We handle a lot of litigation within the county. We are the primary prosecutor for the county's civil commitment cases. So if there is a Marathon County resident who has a treatable mental illness and is dangerous to themselves or others to meet the required legal standards under Chapter 51, my office prosecutes those cases. In the last few years, we've averaged between 300 and 400 of those cases every year. So we work closely with North Central Healthcare in getting recommendations on how to proceed on those cases, and we work with law enforcement on updating their training on the mental health laws in Wisconsin. We also handle our child support enforcement and paternity actions. That's another statutory creation. Our local child support agency is charged with bringing those actions to court. My office is charged with prosecuting them as well. We have many thousands of cases in which the local child support agency is a party, and my office will represent child support in establishing new child support orders, in attempting to enforce child support, and in attempting to collect child support arrearages when that's appropriate. We also handle child protection cases. They're also known as CHIPS cases in the legal world. Chapter 48 designates Corporation Counsel as the prosecutor of those cases, and we work very closely with our Department of Social Services on bringing those cases into court and through the court process, and also reaching permanency, whether it's through reunifying the children with their parents or having guardianships or termination of parental rights in the case where those are appropriate. In 2016, when I started at Corporation Counsel's office, we had a huge explosion in those CHIPS cases due mainly to the opioid epidemic that was going on. The increase in drug use amongst parents, our numbers skyrocketed. A lot of our litigation still revolves around getting those cases to permanency. We have seen some changes in law and also changes in how those cases are handled that have cut the in-court appearances down, but there's still certainly a lot of those cases that happen. We also handle cases that are brought by Adult Protective Services. Those are adult guardianship and protective placement cases. State statute requires that counties provide those services, and we bring them to court as well. I am also the primary prosecutor if you get a parking ticket in the courthouse parking lot. So if you do, you will see me in court. And you know, I work very closely with all county departments, and I think some of the projects that we're currently working on, we have a records retention policy that was last updated in 1994. So that's something that we're looking at implementing. You'll probably see later this year some action that will ask for your approval. And we're also working on developing and rolling out a social media policy. The county's never really had a full-fledged policy for how departments should handle social media, both as a business and how employees should use social media. So we're trying to roll that out as well. And that's about all.
Well, thank you. Any questions for Michael? Okay, the administrator would like to add first, and then we'll go to Supervisor Dickinson next.
Actually, my comments are more in wrap-up, so certainly take any
Okay.
questions first.
Supervisor Dickinson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was looking at the 2021 highlights, and it looks like, as you explained here, that mental commitments have declined since 2018, since the implementation of CART. So what is CART? And are some of these commitments due to COVID, the lack of commitments?
Sure. I can't say for certain whether the decrease in 2020 is due to COVID. I think certainly some of that is due to COVID. CART is the Community Assessment and Response Team. It's actually a team of law enforcement and North Central Healthcare staff. This is a team that's developed partly because of the need to have specific and well-trained responders for these people who are in mental health crisis. So we have employees from our Sheriff's Office and Wausau Police Department who work very closely with North Central Healthcare to respond to incidents where people are dangerous to themselves or others, or are making threats either to themselves or to other people, or are unable to care for themselves. These officers are trained, and part of the reason that they are involved and are successful in responding is that they don't always result in having the cases brought to court. Sometimes a well-trained officer and a North Central Healthcare response team can meet with someone who's in crisis and get them to voluntarily admit themselves, which wouldn't result in a court case. So that has certainly affected some of the numbers that we've seen year by year, and we've seen a great benefit in the use of that team.
It's also part of one of the best practices that resulted from one of the county's participation in a Step Up program from NACO.
So just as a follow-up to that, then, given what we're talking about with mental health in our younger population, would we also expect to see more mental health commitments in an older adult population and therefore more commitments? Or are we, do you see where I'm going with that? So our commitments are going down, but mental health issues are going up. So would we expect to see more commitments, or is the action of CART going to be to not commit people as much as possible? Can you talk to that at all?
I would start by saying I'm definitely not the specialist as far as mental health. I don't have a therapy background, and I don't have that training. I can speak a little bit to your question. I think depending on the particular call, CART could be successful in having someone admitted voluntarily, or their contact could result in a commitment. So it really depends on the particular circumstances of who they're interacting with. I don't know if there's data that would suggest whether we would or should be seeing an increase in commitments. I think these numbers are actually from the middle of 2021, so 2021 year to date. That column, the 2021 commitment numbers are higher than what they were in 2020, the final numbers, which I can get to you at some point after today's meeting. So we did see an increase at the end of the year. I don't have the data to say what that's due to.
And understand that if there's a voluntary commitment, that would not be part of this statistics. These are only the involuntary commitments.
I think that's a very good question with respect to commitments. And CART, I think it's important to point out, is one of the many strategies we've really used to try to address mental health. And I'm a broken record. I always go to the strategic plan and say, okay, why are we doing things? Objective 3.7 relates to ensuring people have adequate access to mental health treatment. CART is one specific strategy under Strategy D. As Chair Gibbs referenced, there was a big focus through your strategic plan, and Strategy D is talking about develop a more comprehensive approach to crisis prevention and serving people, adults and children in crisis. So when we look at what CART is, it's a partnership with law enforcement, and in fact, Laura Scudari, our health officer, is in the back. In a previous life, she worked at North Central Healthcare and was instrumental in working with Chief Deputy Billub and officers from Wausau Police Department to implement that best practice strategy that came from it's used in a number of communities, but highlighted by the Stepping Up initiative through NACO. It's something that came out of our Criminal Justice Collaborating Council, also known as our Evidence-Based Decision-Making Group, identifying this is an important strategy. CART is an important strategy for one kind of avenue that people have to get into the crisis system, and that's through law enforcement. Historically, it's not simply commitments that were a focus, it's the challenges that come with having individuals with mental health issues in our jail. And recognizing that jails are not appropriate places for individuals that really their issue is a one of mental health. We want to make sure we get them into the appropriate system, the mental health system. So CART, the Crisis Assessment Response Team, that partnership with law enforcement and crisis professionals, is aimed primarily to keep people that would otherwise be perhaps entering the justice system when really the need is a mental health need. We make sure we try to identify that. Another initiative we undertook through the strategic plan, to Supervisor Dickinson's point, to try to bring those commitments down, is we spent a lot of time and energy training law enforcement through CIT, another acronym, Crisis Intervention Training, which is making sure that law enforcement, when they arrive on a scene, they can recognize that Lance is really suffering not from a behavioral issue that would lead Sheriff Scott Parks from taking me into custody, but instead for Sheriff Scott Parks to say, you know what, Lance needs help from a crisis professional and tying me to those pieces. But again, I think we've done a lot of things in 2018, and I say that frequently because of the strategic plan. We started looking at a lot of things a little differently, and we targeted that for adults in crisis. You guys are going to be talking about some other strategies that we employed for children in crisis. We've done a lot of things differently that have perhaps resulted in those numbers going down, but I think Mike makes a great point. That doesn't mean that our work with individuals in crisis has gone down. Commitments have gone down. We work very hard, very diligently to work with people voluntarily. It probably comes as no surprise to all of you. Outcomes are much better when an individual makes the determination that they need to go into care. They recognize that through conversation, and then they are aligned with that treatment plan, as opposed to what happens in a traditional commitment. So we take custody of that person, law enforcement transports that person into our central health care. There's an evaluation by a mental health professional, and then they're detained against their will. They're committed, and work through Mike's office to stay in that involuntary commitment. So there's a lot of things that probably have changed those numbers, and I think to Supervisor Dickinson's question, we'd all be speculating as to COVID and its impact, but certainly mental health treatment. We didn't interact with people in the same way that we had prior to COVID in terms of frequency or intensity of contact. That I think it's a fair question to see what's 2022 and beyond going to look like. That was a very long-winded response, but thank you.
That's the lawyer in you. Next, we have a question. Supervisor Krause.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. I'm on the Health and Human Services Committee. I'm also a member of NAMI, which is the National Alliance for Mental Illness, and they have worked towards training the officers in different parts of Wisconsin to deal with people who are in a mental health crisis. Many of the police officers have gotten psychological classes in dealing with people who are in crisis and mental illness. And so they are able to speak to them and handle them in such a way to downplay the crisis, keep them calm, so that these people are not transported to North Central Health Care and committed. The other thing is on this CART team, there is a social worker also who knows how to deal with some of these incidences. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Michael? Thank you, Michael. We will move on to the
Sorry,
Okay,
it's the
and
lawyer
wrap
in
up.
me to
Thanks.
interrupt once again. Again, I just wanted to, I should have said this before when these educational presentations are happening. It was the desire of the chair to bring the departments, before you we're starting with HR, Finance, and Property as a standing committee and working through what those departments are, so you can start to see what you might anticipate to see before you in terms of policy issues to address. And Molly laid them all out for you. Those are the big ones. You're going to see from, you're going to hear from Molly, myself. You've probably already heard of it at some of your standing committees about the challenges, and we're not unique. The challenges that we're facing relative to retaining talent and attracting new talent. So we're doing a lot of things based on the direction from the board to make sure we have a class compensation study that we're going to have that. You're going to have policy questions that come from that. You're going to have financial, Christy was here today, you're going to have financial implications of that through your annual budget. You're going to see, and you're going to interact with our Workday system to address a lot of the learning management challenges that Molly referenced. So she did a great job of showing you the environment in which we live. For those of you that are on public safety, you've heard from the sheriff's office about the challenges that we're having in a couple of divisions, but across our organization, we do have, we're not immune to the challenges that exist in every other aspect of the economy. So I just wanted to lay that out for you. And if you do have specific things for future departments when they come before you and we move on to, for example, the Public Safety Committee, if you have specific things you want to hear about from those respective department heads, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. But that, again, was the impetus. Reach out to the chair and myself. That was the impetus to having these before you, just to introduce the department head and also kind of foreshadow what we expect to come before you during this term.
Okay, thank you, Administrator Leonard. And we'll move on to item C, consent agenda, items C8 through items C12B. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Zhang and seconded by Supervisor Langenhan. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote and utilize the voting system. Supervisor Bocazill, thank you, and everybody will proceed. And the motion is carried 38-0, and that is unanimous. Thank you, and we'll move on to resolutions from the HR, Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee. Items D13, approval of the 2022 budget transfers for Marathon County Department of Appropriations. And before we get to that, we had two requests for some additional information. Those are the Health Department budget transfer, $72,974, and also the Sheriff's Department $2,000 budget transfer. And so I would invite the administrator to start us off on that education on those two items.
So I'll be really brief. I sent you all a long email. So I'm not going to reiterate. I tried to listen to the board meeting. I watched the meeting, and I tried to put all the information from the questions that I was able to hear into that email. So I'm not going to reiterate that. But one of the questions that was asked was, what's the, how I interpret what's the return on investment or what's the benefit or impact of these programs. I can't speak to that, but Laura Scudari was able to make contact with a couple of stakeholders or partners in that mental health consortium. So be happy to have Mr. Jeff Lindell come up. We can have Lee Shipway come up, and Amanda Ostrowski from the Health Department if the board has any questions about that program. Lee has been a counselor that has participated through the consortium, and Mr. Lindell is a professional with formerly the Wausau School District, currently with the Everest School District, and they can talk about the impact of that program. So I'd be happy to have them come up and just briefly touch on the program and their role and the impact, what they've seen, and then answer any questions from the board, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely, please.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lee Shipway. I am the former Executive Director of Peaceful Solutions Counseling. I retired a year ago. I am the co-founder of Peaceful Solutions Counseling, which is a mental health and substance abuse counseling clinic nonprofit here in Wausau. I'm also the creator of the Marathon County Counseling, School-Based Counseling Consortium. I'm just going to give you a little history on how that all started and what accomplishments we had, and then I'm going to hand it over to Jeff to talk about it from a school perspective. So actually I'm going to take you back to 2015. At that point in time, I received a phone call from the guidance counselor at Edgar School Public Schools saying, we really need a mental health therapist in the schools to provide therapy. We have quite a few kids who are struggling with anxiety and depression and had some suicides and some suicidal thought of different students. It was very difficult, especially for the western part of the county, for those kids to receive services, because in order for them to do that, they would have to travel to Wausau or they'd have to travel to Marshfield, and they would miss at least a half a day of school. In addition to that, their parents would have to take off of work a half a day to do that transportation. And so it made perfect sense to be able to see if we could provide that service in the school. There were a couple barriers before that, one of which the state clinic licensing rules were that you had to provide therapy in a clinic. You were not allowed to provide it outside of that clinic. That barrier has been taken away, and so that was a big help. At the time, I happened to have a therapist who lived in Edgar, and she was a child therapist, and I said to her, hey, how'd you like to not have to drive to Wausau one day a week and go to the Edgar schools instead? And she loved it, and it was a great partnership, and it lasted very, very long. Probably within that next year, I got many phone calls from the Western schools, Stratford, Athens, a lot of different schools asking for the same thing, assuming that we just had a ton of therapists that we could send them there, and we didn't. I didn't have the staffing to be able to do that. That same issue kept coming up at a variety of different committees that I was a member of at the time. And finally, I just said to myself, okay, we should just make this happen. And so I sent a letter to all of the therapists, all the clinics in the region, not just Wausau, but Marshfield, Western region. We probably invited 30, 35 people, I think. Out of that, I'm going to fast forward to present day. We have 11 clinics working together as a consortium to provide therapy for kids in schools, and that covers kindergarten through high school. We are covering every single public school in the county. It may not be 5 days a week, but it's at least 1 day a week, or some schools maybe it's 2 days a week, 3 days a week, depending on the need. And so we went to the school directors and said, can you triage for us the different schools? It was quite the undertaking to be able to figure out which schools needed the most help and to be able to figure out how much of an FTE to put in each of those schools. Plus, we were working with for-profits and nonprofits and North Central Healthcare, which is the government public agency. That's not a small feat to get all the people played well together in the sandbox, but we did it. And I have to say I'm very proud of that, and you all should be proud of that. This community does a great job of collaborating and working together and doing what is best for those kids. So what we made sure we did was in the junior highs and high schools, we made sure that we had dual licensed therapists. What that means is you're licensed as a mental health professional, you're also licensed as a substance abuse professional, because we knew that there were a lot of kids in junior high, believe it or not, and high school who were using substances. Now, what a lot of people don't understand is that a lot of substance abuse issues really aren't substance abuse issues. And I know that sounds shocking probably. They're underlying mental health concerns. For decades, in the beginning of my career, there were two camps. There was substance abuse and there was mental health. Over the last 15 years, my profession now realizes that they are commingled. There's something called dual diagnosis. And so a lot of times when someone has a substance use disorder, they go to treatment. You've probably seen this many times. They go into treatment, they get out, they start drinking again. They go into treatment, they get out, they keep going and going. A lot of times that's because there's an underlying mental health disorder, and that mental health disorder is not being treated, so therefore the substance abuse disorder comes back. It's really important for us to pay attention to children especially, because if we can pay attention to mental health needs of kids when they're younger, we teach them coping skills, that then prevents them from having anxiety and depression as adults, which is the most common form of mental health in our country. If we can prevent the mental health issues, we can prevent the substance use disorders. So I just want to make sure you understand that, because most people I talk to have no idea that that's how that works, that it's very intermingled. So one of the important parts of the consortium and what makes it very successful is that we have the backing of the health department. They provide us with Hannah Schomer's time and Aaron Ruff's time. They are the coordinators. Without them coordinating this, it would never work. I can tell you right now, I know that it would fold if we didn't have somebody kind of coordinating all the different clinics. 'Cause sometimes there are some turf issues, and it's difficult work, I'm not gonna lie. It's hard to leave your clinic, go into a clinic and do this. Into a school. It's so much easier to just stay in your clinic and do it there. So I'm gonna stop there and hand it over to Jeff. Thank you.
Good evening, Jeff Lindell. I'm the Director of Student Services for DC Everest. I did work for a district to the north of DC Everest for quite a few years as well. But I've been a Director of Student Services for 11 years. And one of the things that I learned going to the Everest district is the problems are not unique. They are very similar across districts. So I came with a little bit of data from a district lens, just about the impact that mental health, trauma, adverse childhood experiences are having on the learning of our students. It is without questioning impacting the progression from an academic standpoint of our students. I've got some 2019 youth risk behavior data. So our county has been pretty instrumental of taking a county-wide look at the youth risk behavior survey. We've done it as a district, both districts that I've been in for years prior to that as well. But in 2019, so it was prior to the pandemic, but certainly after we started our process as a consortium, our data in Everest, and I'm comfortable saying, because I think you can look at data across the state and you'll see something very similar. The number of students reporting a significant anxiety at our senior high was 43%. At our junior high, which is 8th and 9th grade, it was 48%. Then the number of students who had reported a prolonged sadness, 25% of our high school students, but 41% of our females reported a prolonged sadness. At the junior high, it was 34% overall, and 62% of our 9th grade girls had reported some level of prolonged sadness. And ultimately, I think what you see for some of that is going into our community and running into the same problems that we've talked about from an adult standpoint. But the county obviously identified mental health as a community health priority as well. Huge credit to Lee for saying, let's come together and do something about this. I think what research really tells us is that early intervention is key. There's not a ton of argument around literacy when it comes to early intervention. Our kids are learning how to read till about 3rd grade, and then they really shift into reading to learn from that point forward. So hitting that expectation by 3rd grade is incredibly important. Equally important from a behavioral standpoint as well, because we know that the earlier we intervene with our students, the more successful they're going to be in the long run. To Lee's point also, our goal as a district was to allow kids that needed that resource to have access to the resource without barriers. And so we certainly had some families who were willing to pick their children up. The commute from the Western Marathon County standpoint is incredibly difficult, but we even saw that from a metro standpoint as well. Our kids would leave, have to transport to a clinic. We're there for 45, 50 minutes, transport back. Sometimes chose at the end of the day not to come back, depending upon when that appointment was, or at the beginning of the day not to start at school. So we would lose our kids from an academic standpoint for quite a long time as well. We felt like a consortium, mental health consortium, was going to eliminate some of those issues of not being in class. I think equally important, we had too many parents who didn't have the access or the ability to go pick their children up for an appointment. And so we knew we had some of our students, a number of our students who just weren't being treated for the mental health needs that they needed to be treated for. I think important too, and maybe because it started in Western Marathon County, what was intriguing to me, I think sometimes in the metro area, we might get a little greedy regarding resources. And this initiative was led by initially Western Marathon County. And when we came on board as a metro area school district group, we respected that. And I think it was important for us to maintain a county-wide look at this initiative. and not pull resources out of schools in Western Marathon County that had additional issues in terms of accessing those resources. And we were successful of that in year one, being in every county school in the district. From a results standpoint, and then I'll certainly be open to questions if appropriate. In the first 4 years of our consortium, we've served over 1,500 students. So 4 years countywide, over 1,500 students have received services. Our early numbers told us about half of our students in that first year had never seen a counselor before. And I think that spoke volumes to me as just the reality that kids that wanted and needed access to the resource were not getting it on their own. I think it's important also just to acknowledge that it's a voluntary agreement between a clinic and a student or a child and their family. The role of the school district is simply to provide a space and eliminate the concern around roadblocks to getting access to that treatment. So all of the interaction essentially goes through the clinic therapist and the student and family. We do a client satisfaction survey. We had 78 students respond, which is a pretty good percentage. It's certainly not all of our students. 88% of our students across the county that responded said counselors were helpful to them. 82% of our students said that the counselor helped with problems of feeling sad and hopeless. And 69% of the students who responded said the counselor helped with problems of feeling anxious, tense, nervous, and scared. And so what we're seeing is that it's impacting our students. It's giving an opportunity where we're losing maybe 45 minutes of a student from their classroom instruction. We're seeing that kids that don't have the ability to access the resources in the community have that resource inside the district, and the impact that it's having on their learning as a result is important as well. So I appreciate the opportunity just to give you one lens, acknowledge that on one lens of many that are associated with it, but could not be more proud of the fact that we're impacting schools and students across our county.
Okay, questions for Lee or Jeff? Use the request to speak, please. Supervisor Lemmer, please.
I was a teacher with the Wausau School District for the last 10 years at John Muir, and so I saw firsthand the benefit of the program that Dr. Lindell was just talking about. For me, it was a big peace of mind knowing there's one more arm of support for these kiddos that I have in my classroom. I had middle schoolers, 8th graders, and they are, like you said, sometimes mental health issues or just daily stressors manifest in a behavior. If we can get those behaviors under wrap early on, it might stop something later with our SRO or somebody else in the community needing police intervention. So I just would like to, as a teacher standpoint, thank you for this program and advocate for it, and just would love to see it expanded.
Okay, Supervisor Baker.
Thank you. So I had several questions. I had spoken to an elementary school teacher in the one of the metro school districts, and she did not give positive feedback about the program. And one of the concerns is that we're taking away what should be parental rights and responsibilities, both rights and responsibilities, and transferring that to the school system. And it seems to be every year more and more of the raising of our children is not by parents, whether that's the Virginia governor who says that parents shouldn't have a say in their children's education, or just recently the Conomowoc School District threatening legal action against a mother for protesting pornography. So some of my concerns are mental health is such a broad aspect. Is that in the link that Administrator Leonard sent out, 36.5% of the feedback came from K through 3, and 27.8% came from 4th and 5th grade. So 62% from 5th grade and under. I can understand this more in junior high and senior high, but I don't see, I'm concerned about in the younger ages. Are you discussing gender dysphoria in these meetings? Is that shared with the parents? So how are these children referred to this? Is the parents involved? Are the parents in the room? Are the parents not in the room? And do the parents get information on what's been discussed? Thank you.
Well, I mean, I can start. What's the beautiful part about this initiative to me is we were certainly there from the start, but we also, from a school district perspective, take a step back. I can tell you that I think some teachers have struggled with it because their kids are pulled out of class, right? Because it's a school-based initiative and opportunity. What's the benefit to me is they've been pulled out for at least half the amount of time, if not more than that, from the classroom if a parent comes to pick their child up to receive the services. For us, it's been pretty hands-off. We don't do anything without, in terms of referring a child to therapy or treatment through a counselor without communicating with a parent to do that. And that communication doesn't necessarily go through a teacher, so I wouldn't fault the teacher for not knowing that piece of it. Our counselors and our school social workers certainly will work with parents. And typically we're working with parents that are struggling and not knowing what to do. We don't hear what's going on. In fact, sometimes we'll have a release, and I'll let Lee talk about it as well, that allows us to communicate with the counselor. I'm in situations where we deal with kids who really need that access, and what I tell those students is, I don't want you to worry about what you're talking to a counselor in terms of me finding out about. It would be counterintuitive for me to ask a student to go receive some counseling or work through some issues and then ask what it's all about. Our initiative around that is, what can we do as a district or as a school to help a child be more successful? So those are the types of things that we would hope to hear from a counselor, but we don't even get to hear that unless there's a release that's signed by a parent as well. So.
I love that question because I think a lot of times people are not understanding the process. There is something called DHS 35 and DHS 75, which are the state statutes that clinics have to follow in order to be licensed. One of the main integral parts of that is that we cannot provide services to a child without parental permission. So they have to sign a written consent for therapy. So these are not children that are being pulled by teachers. These are children whose parents are requesting services, or it might be a social worker who goes to a parent and says, I think maybe your child could benefit from services, and then that parent has a conversation with the clinic that's assigned to that school, and they have a conversation over whether or not they think it would be beneficial for their child. If they don't want their child in therapy, that child's not in therapy. We develop a treatment plan for that child based on what the diagnosis is and what the presenting symptoms are, and then that plan is discussed with the parents as well, and we keep them informed all throughout the process in terms of the progress of their child. So parents are an integral part of this. We are not taking parents out of this at all.
Any other questions? Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you mentioned that there are 11 schools
No.
that have,
11 clinics. 11 clinics
so
providing.
not every school has psychologists coming into their space.
Every public school has a therapist coming in. They're not psychologists, they're master's level therapists.
Okay.
So I believe it's 51 schools in the county, if I'm right. And every single one of those has a therapist that's there at least a half a day, if not a whole day, 2 days, 3 days, depending on the needs of that particular building.
Is there a way to provide numbers on that? Is there a way to get a listing by school district of how many therapists are coming in, or?
Yeah, there is.
Because, as many know here already, you may not know, I'm on the Stratford School District, school board, school board. And you'd be amazed at what happens underneath a board's nose. To where you know something, but you don't know, you set some policy, you set some budget, and then the school counselor or the school administration will do something. And so boards aren't always aware of all of the details because we are told time and time again to not micromanage or not get into the weeds, right? So that's where I'm just looking for more of that information. So that's a bit of a surprise to me as a Stratford School Board member that we are having, therapists come into our building at different times and speaking to children, which is something I'll take back, to our school. So thank you for that, but it would be nice to have a little bit more of that information as a county board member. I want to mention one thing, being on the Stratford School Board and going down to the WISB conventions, probably about 10 of them, 9 or 10 of them. One session I had gone down to, they talked about on a daily basis, you have a mental health, you're on a scale from 0 to 100, right? I don't know if you've ever heard that. In this particular, I would think you would have. Some days you wake up, you're a 75. Some days you wake up, you're a 50. Some days you wake up, you're a 30. Correct.
Yes.
So when we look at the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, we ask these questions, what about a significant anxiety or if you felt sadness? Well, in the past year, well, I bet everybody in this room could mark down that, right? So one of the concerns I have about data, and particularly with the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, is that it asks these kinds of questions that we can then take that and use that to support what we want. Okay, so I guess what I would ask is, what is a significant anxiety? Or what is prolonged sadness? Is that something you can define for me? You're asking a child to answer that question.
Yeah, so that would be in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, otherwise known as the DSM, which all diagnosing around the world occurs out of that book. So prolonged anxiety, prolonged depression, I don't have that memorized, and it's been a year since I worked in the field, so I kind of took that out of my head, if so to speak, now that I'm retired. But if I remember correctly, depression is feeling sadness more often than not for 5 out of 7 days over a certain length of time, and it's in the DSM. It has one criteria for adults and another for children. So let me make this very clear: the kids that we are seeing are very different than the kids I saw 20, 30 years ago when I started my job. These kids are having high anxiety to the point that they're not eating well. They're not sleeping at night. They are having bad nightmares. They are acting out behaviorally because of anxiety or depression. These are significant mental health concerns. This is not something that we are creating or manufacturing. This is something that is within those children. My profession is just trying to help those children. The same as if you had a child that had a sore throat and you take them to the pediatrician, they want to see if it's strep throat and they're going to treat that child. That's all we're trying to do, is help children become healthier.
I just would like to just reiterate too that 62% of our ninth grade females are experiencing that. We're not suggesting that we as our counseling team or social work team should refer 62% of our ninth grade females. To your point, we have rough days as adults. Our kids have rough days. When we're at a 30%, which I don't know if I know what that piece of it exactly means here, but I know your idea. When we have a 30%, we're not as good in school or we're not as good in work as what we are when we're at 100% or a 70%, right? Just to that point, we acknowledge that, and our intent is not to over-refer. It's to work with families to try to determine, do you feel like your child has a need? Sometimes we believe they do, and parents don't. And we accept that ultimately. And sometimes parents think their child needs some additional support that we might not see either. But we're going to try to create an avenue where they can do that more effectively.
Supervisor Bushman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The grant money pays for the access to the counselors? No.
No, the therapy is paid for by the parents, their child's health insurance. Children that don't have insurance or whose parents have a barrier to having that insurance accessed, we have a little bit of United Way funding that helps us with that. If not, the nonprofit clinics then see those children pro bono and don't charge anybody. So no, the grant money is for the Marathon County Health Department to be able to provide the coordinator and the, I don't know what Aaron's title is.
I figured out. Okay. Yep, it's about 1.75 FTE, and so the intent of it is it's a 8-year grant. We're in year 6, and so the funding is really to end this cycle, this grant cycle, which is to provide a sustainability plan so that this consortium can continue without health department involvement.
Okay, Supervisor Krause.
Thank you, Chair. As a teacher, we had parent-teacher conferences, maybe 2-3 times a year, so we could talk with the parents about how the student was doing in the classes and how they were progressing in their work. I have a question that the previous supervisor brought up, and that was, what is the confidentiality here? You know, does the counselor discuss anything that their child says to their parents? Is there a meeting with the parents to discuss problems, or is it completely confidential? And what happens if a student starts talking about wanting to commit suicide or become violent, like we have had some past students in the schools come in with guns or pictures of violence and things like that? So what are the guidelines there?
Thank you for the question. So I'm going to refer the state guidelines again and the licensing requirements for clinics. Everything in a session is confidential for adults. For children, parents do have a right to see that entire record and have a right to have conversations with the therapist about what is being talked about in those therapy sessions. Most therapists, I mean, everybody does it a little differently, but I know at most clinics we'll see a child for 2 or 3 sessions, and then we have a parent session alone where we can talk with the parent about some things that we think would be good for them to know, maybe some things they could implement at home to help that child overcome the anxiety and the depression. In terms of suicidalness, however, the state's very clear, and so actually is the nation, that if someone is suicidal or homicidal, we have a duty to warn. It's the Tarasoff ruling that came out of California many decades ago, which says the therapist has to warn the person who's being threatened if it's a homicidal threat, and has to warn law enforcement. If it's suicide, we are to warn whoever is with family members or someone that could help that person, or contact law enforcement, which then would access North Central Healthcare facilities here.
Thank you.
Supervisor Sandulski.
Yeah, I just had a question. Like, what are the statistics in the last 2 years with the COVID responses? How much have the health crisis or mental health crisis increased?
I can speak a little bit to that. And again, hello, I'm Laura Scuderi. I'm the health officer here. We do have information that is provided in the LIFE report. And again, the LIFE report is, if you just search for Marathon County LIFE report, it will come right up. I can tell you that COVID made existing barriers to care much worse and put spotlights on ways the system could be improved to serve kids better. The School Counseling Consortium and Work Around Mental Health that is paid for by this grant has helped individuals get access to necessary services. And that sustainability of those resources and successes need to be followed through to ensure ongoing sustainability. So when it comes to actual data regarding that, we have a number of different data sources that we use. We look at the YRBS data. We also look at suicide rates. And again, the LIFE report is actually something that we do with a number of different partners, including United Way. And that report provides us with data that supports all kinds of different health issues and other key indicators within our community. Let me just take a quick look at this. So in order to give you a full picture of mental health in our county, I would turn to the LIFE report, which is the community health assessment as required by DHS 14004. And on page 42, it does give a snapshot of mental health in our community. You'll find this data and a lot more also on our Marathon County Pulse platform, which was funded in part by work that was funded by this MCW grant. Notably, in Marathon County, 1 in 3 teenagers reported having poor mental health and 1 in 4 reported feeling depressed. And mental health is among the top concerns reported by the Marathon County teens on the YRBS data.
Okay, next we have Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are your services offered to the county's private schools and the children in them as well?
They have not been because we just don't have the personnel to do it. All of the clinics are spread so thin. And so it was our goal at one point to be able to go into those schools as well if they, and we've been asked to many times, actually begged at times that we just don't have enough therapists.
So it is my understanding that we have some private schools in the area that are accessing a resource now. It's not through the consortium. In fact, we've had at least one district in the county also step away from the consortium, and it's really been a lack of resources. It's been a lack of therapists available, and so they've entered an agreement with a separate a clinic as well.
With limited resources, how do you decide which schools to support and which ones not to?
Yeah, I love that question actually too. I think early on, one of the things that we talked about, the state of Minnesota is miles ahead of the state of Wisconsin, just to be honest about this type of work. And they took the approach of having a therapist basically embedded into a school longer or more time than what they needed. And the therapist kind of, I guess, somewhat became a de facto member of the staff in that they just knew who that person was. Part of the arm of our work is to use therapists to educate our staff too around how do you navigate students with anxiety, for example, in your classroom? What systems can you put into place that will help create a better learning environment for the kids that struggle, essentially? So what we decided to do as a county is to stretch our impact widely. And so sometimes we're a mile wide, inch deep, just to be frank with the number of therapists that we have available to do the work. But we felt like that was better to reach all aspects than it was to do kind of a narrow but deep reach in a couple of different school districts. So that was, we had some good discussion around what that might look like, but the intent was to try to stretch ourselves across the county. The negative impact to that is there's just not enough resources. We've got schools all over the county that feel like they need more time, that we just don't have the resources to give from a therapist standpoint.
And, use of resources is a continual conversation when it comes to sustainability. So in this next phase of the grant, we're going to be speaking about how do we ensure that we have enough resources in order to sustain all the good work that we've done. And so that is what we need to continue to do.
Okay, Supervisor Hardinger.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question that's probably not that easy for you to answer, but I'd like to thank you for your time here tonight and everything you're doing for our children. I've got two kids that are in the Everest system. So one thing that kind of just pops in my head here, what's the underlying cause that you guys are seeing or the counselors are seeing throughout the school districts? Is it things that are changing at home? Is it social media platform? Is it things that are happening in school? What is causing this with our children?
Yeah, I'll just give you a school district lens, but I'll turn it over to the expert. That's a great question, and I think it's a little bit of yes to all of the stuff that you've talked about. I think one of the things we're seeing as a district is a wide spectrum of our students that are accessing resources, right? So I give you my daughter as an example. She is a high-level student. She's taken 4 AP or 5 AP classes. Her level of anxiety at times during the course of a year with that level of study is significant, right? And so I think we even see that piece of it, like high achieving students who are struggling with their emotions and how to navigate the stressors that life just brings to us, right? We have them as adults, right? We've got a colleague whose dog had emergency surgery today, right? Her level of anxiety today was such that being at work wasn't really, a function of what she could do. But we see all of that other stuff too. We see struggles within homes for sure. We see trauma in kids and the impact that trauma has on them in a learning environment. And we. From a trauma lens, I know that I've experienced kids where kids might walk in, and I would say back in my days in a building where all I do is say hi to them and it's enough for them to snap, right? Because the level of anxiety or whatever happened potentially in a home that morning put them at this level, and all somebody needed to do is say hi, and it kind of reached the boiling point. So it's a little bit of all those things. And I would say it's probably unique to the individual student from my lens, but.
I echo everything Jeff said. In addition to that, I would say I have seen over the years kind of like the second and third generation, if you will, of children struggling because their parents struggled and their parents struggled in terms of mental health issues. We see more substance abuse with adults in our community. Obviously, if you've got children and you are addicted to a substance, you're probably not taking as good a care of your children as should be. And so those children are then suffering from neglect and not high enough to the level that social services can remove that child from the home. We see a lot of kids who are victims of sexual abuse, physical abuse. I spent about 15 years of my career treating childhood incest survivors, 3 years old, 4, 5, 6, abused by dad, grandpa, uncle, mom's boyfriend, you name it. So that trauma changes the brain's mechanisms forever, and that makes them like 4 times more likely for being a victim of future things as an adult. It also makes them way more likely for depression and anxiety. Added to that, the social media. I absolutely think social media has had a horrible impact. Kids are way too nervous and anxious about fitting in and making sure that they have enough likes on their selfie pictures or what can be. And I think that has not helped the situation, I'll put it that way.
Okay, next we have Supervisor Shafinsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to build on Supervisor Herdinger's question. And again, this is a question that I don't know that you have a true answer to, but I think it's important that we pose it. And that is, you made the statement early on in your introduction that what you've seen over the course of your career has changed dramatically. And please don't take this the wrong way. But as a society, what I see and what I think I hear you saying is we have failed. We have failed to develop our children and provide a stable environment. That's why we're seeing the types of behaviors, whether they're mental health behaviors, violent behaviors, whatever, all that range of negative behavior, let's call it, this huge increase. So my question to all of you as a team is to step back and ask, we're failing on a tactical level. What on a strategic level can you do, can we do to actually address the problem and actually start to turn the tide back? Because you're standing there with your finger in the dike, but you're losing. You're trying valiantly, but you're losing. So we maybe need another approach. I'm not that smart. I don't know what it is. I'm just asking the question relative to what I see.
So it sounds like you're asking about strategy, and I would want to turn your back to the strategic plan, Marathon County strategic plan, and I believe it's 3.4 and 3.7. Lance, you can check my 3.3. Thank you. And those are two aspects that involve mental health and ensuring that kids are set up to succeed. And so those are the ways that we're chipping away at the problem. In public health, we often talk about wicked problems. We talk about problems that have a lot of causes and complicated factors. And so if there was a silver bullet to any of these problems, we hopefully would have found it by now. These are problems that are systemic, and they need a lot of attention from a variety of different resources. And that's part of the reason why we were successful in what we did, is because we engaged school systems, we engaged counselors, and we were able, as Marathon County's Health Department, be a strategic leader and help bring people together so that we can tackle these problems from a systemic perspective.
Okay, any other questions?
Can I
Go
just say
ahead.
to
Go
that
ahead.
too? One of the things I'm comfortable with is that our children, to your question, I think it's a valid question, like what can we do differently, not as an education system, but as a society, right? What we experience in our buildings are just a microcosm of our society. But what I know is our children are not responsible for the behaviors of the adults in their lives or the adults of our community. So our objective with this is solely to have early intervention with young children. If we can give them the skills at a young age, especially those that need additional supports to that's outside of our scope as a school district to earn or gain those skills, we want to do that. And so that's a little bit of our intent from a school-based standpoint, is what can we do for the children of our society who are behind every behavior is an emotion that a child doesn't know what to do with, right? And so how do we give them the skills to navigate those emotions at a young age to hopefully turn the tide? And I think it's going to be more than just this, but I think this is one aspect that's going to hopefully impact our young children and our community to give them a better shot at eliminating the cycle that I can't remember. Maybe it was Lee that talked about a generational approach, but that's our intent a little bit, is how can we give kids skill sets to get them out of a cycle that their generational approach is mired in.
Supervisor Marash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is more for Mr. Lindell. I'm wondering if the school counselors on staff at the schools work with kids on anything other than social emotional learning these days, and the postgraduate planning. So are they able to help with mental health too, or are they just focused on those things?
So our counselors, I've worked with counselors, school counselors that have their certification for community-based counseling. In the setting of a school and the role of a school counselor, it's outside of their scope to practice. And so do they help kids navigate? Like, certainly we've got kids that aren't in any counseling setting that are struggling. Yeah, our counselors will help them navigate those. But from an academic and career planning standpoint, we won't talk about that tonight. Happy to come back and talk about ACP with you at another time, but we have a robust ACP, academic and career planning. Our job, in addition to dealing with that emotional piece, is to prepare kids for life after high school. And we believe wholeheartedly that means being college, career, and life ready, so it hits all aspects.
Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Ms. Scuderia, Mr. Lindell, and Ms. Shipway all kind of commented just recently that this is not going to be enough, that there will be more, that this is going to be ongoing. When the grant is done, what are we going to do with these two folks, right? The issues are getting worse and worse. We talk about in the resolution embedding therapists in the schools, institutionalizing this. In the state, they talk about, in the DPI, it talks about community schools, making schools, and there are some community schools already, but what does that mean? You can get anything you want. The student can get anything. The child can get anything at school. Breakfast, lunch, after school snack, after daycare, it's after school daycare, therapists, you can have dentists coming in, you can have doctors coming in. The great concern, the overarching concern, is we have this strategic plan that I did not sign an oath to. I signed an oath to the U.S. Constitution and the Wisconsin Constitution. We have this strategic plan and comprehensive plan put in place before I was here. I do not have to adhere to it. I don't have to adhere to, by December 31, 2022, the percentage of high school students in Marathon County who felt sad or hopeless every day for 2 or more weeks in a row, that they stopped doing usual activities during the 12 months before the survey will be less than 20%. There is no way that we can achieve that, and it's just a very kind of arbitrary number. The point being, the overarching thought and my concern is knowing that, and I'm not arguing this point, students and children are going through a lot. They're going through a lot. In the last 2 years, a lot of adults didn't help them with the policies and things they put in place for these children. And now those same people, to some degree, are saying, well, we can continue to help. Well, we've been helping and it's been getting better. Well, it hasn't been getting better. And the past 2 years made it worse. But we just want to do more. My concern is that we're just throwing money into this big bucket to try to attack something that, honestly, I don't think we can achieve. I don't think anyone can without long-term, consistent care, feel better about themselves, especially not a child who isn't mature yet in their brain. I think I can just, this is the last thing I'll say, and it's my statement, and it's the last thing I'm going to say about it. I think we can say that freshmen and sophomores probably struggle the most, and they tend to, by junior and senior year, chill out a little bit. This is generally what seems to happen. We can throw all we want at third graders and make them feel better. When they're sixth graders, they're probably going to feel the same, and when they're 10th graders, they're probably going to feel the same. So I agree with what Supervisor Marash says. There is a, or whoever it was, there is a greater strategy, maybe Supervisor Shafinsky, a greater strategy that needs to be achieved here to understand how we can help these people. And throwing more money, more programs, embedding and institutionalizing, I don't think is the answer. Thank you.
Supervisor Zhang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to call the question.
Is there any objection to question being called? Is there any objection to question being called? I have a motion on the floor from Supervisor Seubert and a second by Supervisor Robinson to approve the 2022 budget transfers for Marathon County Department of Appropriations, Resolution 42-22. Is there any objection to question being called? Supervisor Dickinson.
Mr.
Is there
Chair.
an objection? The question I'm asking is there an objection to question being called? Is there an objection to question being called? There is. Supervisor Shafinsky. Okay, is there a second to the motion for question being called? Motion has been seconded. That ends debate. There was no one in the request to speak at the time the motion was made, and so debate is ended, subject to the vote on the motion to end debate.
Mr. Chairman, I was repeatedly pressing the technology button, and it was not reacting.
Okay, and you said you were objecting to the question being called. And that's what I have granted. I have granted a vote on the motion of question being called.
Okay.
So as soon as the clerk can put in. So the motion was Supervisor Zhang to called question, and Supervisor Lamont seconded the motion after there was an objection. And therefore, we are on a vote to end debate on the motion to approve. So Supervisor Lamont?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought I was seconding Supervisor to the right of me.
Okay, he had objected.
Right.
Okay. Once he objects, I need to go back and ask for a second to the motion to call the question.
I withdraw my second.
Is there a second? Supervisor Langenhan with the second for the question being called. So now we are on the vote of the motion to end debate. So we're not on a motion to approve the agenda item. We're on a vote to end debate. That's all we're voting on, is a motion to end debate. So this is a proprietary motion, and it does require a 2/3 majority. If we have 2/3 majority, the debate will be ended. So the clerk is ready? We will proceed to vote. The motion is now to A yes vote will end debate if we have 2/3. A no vote will continue the debate on the item. And we'll proceed. That is a 2/3 majority. Debate is ended. Now we will proceed to the motion, and the motion is to approve the 2022 budget transfers for Marathon County Department of Appropriations, Resolution 42-22. Okay, a motion to amend would be out of order, and so I cannot accept a motion to amend at this time because question was called and 2/3 majority of this board has voted to end debate. And so we will proceed to the question, and the question is, a yes vote will approve the 2022 budget transfers for Marathon County Department of Appropriations, Resolution 42-22, and we will proceed to vote. Again, this does require a 2/3 majority. It is a budget transfer item. And we will proceed to declare, and the motion is carried, and we'll move on to item D14, the termination of the deed restrictions on 740 Greenway Court, Mosinee, Resolution 43-22. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Zhang and second by Supervisor Langenhan. Is there any discussion? Maybe we could have a brief explanation by the Chair of Finance.
Thank you, Chairman. This issue came up recently. Several years ago, the county owned the area around the Central Wisconsin Business Park and the airport and transferred a portion of that property to the Indian Head Golf Club. And subsequently, that has been turned over to a developer. At that time, there were some deed restrictions that were placed on that property, including the requirement that they develop it as a golf course or upon sale, the county would have the first right of refusal, and also had some other requirements relative to the potential future location of a well and or a pump house. The area in that, or a parcel in that area not subject to these deed restrictions was recently developed into 24 housing units. There's a desire on the developer's part to develop another 24 units. The city of Mosinee is supporting this effort, and our motion was contingent upon them doing it, but this removes the deed restrictions that were imposed at that time. There is an 18-hole golf course, and the county has just recently also dealt with a remnant parcel and transferred that to the city of Mosinee, so it takes us out of the ownership and control of any of the property in that Central Wisconsin Business Park area. And this allows the developer to go ahead.
Okay, and I would make an announcement that if anybody requests to speak, we've bypassed that by the clerk, and so just raise your hand if you want to address this or have a question about this resolution. Anybody have questions on the resolution 4322? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. Supervisor Gisselman and Supervisor Arstead, please vote.
I lost my connection.
Is it reconnected? The clerk can enter it if you wish. The clerk can enter your vote, Mr. Supervisor Gisselman? Yes? All right, and we'll proceed. And the motion is carried, and it is unanimous. Thank you. We move on to miscellaneous business, announcements and/or requests. I want to congratulate this board. It was a first time in a little over 2 years that we've had all 38 members at this meeting. And so congratulations to this board. We do need signatures from HR Finance. Any other announcements and/or requests? Supervisor Zhang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask all the standing committee to report back to the board about how they're addressing objective 3.8 of our comprehensive plan, preferably by September. I'm not expecting any time soon here, but I'll give them a couple months. Thank you.
Any other announcements and/or requests? Seeing Supervisor Dickinson.
Yeah, I just make the request that if open meetings is not going to work for every vote, then we shouldn't use it. To go ahead and to go through all of that, to have that whole discussion and all the confusion, people trying to step in, not understanding when we can amend, when we can't, okay, through that whole thing we just went through. And then on the very next vote, it's a voice vote. We can't have that. We need to be consistent. Thank you.
There has not been a voice vote. And
Did not Supervisor Gisselman just do a voice vote? Yes, he did. Thank you.
Supervisor Krause.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. I'd like to mention that May is the June is Elder Abuse Month. And I just wanted to mention that because there are still many elderly that are being abused, and some of them die from it. Thank you.
Okay, any other announcements and/or requests? Seeing none, we are down to item number 16. Is there a motion? Motion by Vice Chair McEwen and second by Supervisor Zhang to adjourn is undebatable. All those in favor of the motion to adjourn signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.